Well, in our today's complex world, we are often facing problems which we cannot deal with the standard strategies which we have learned. But we have to make decisions with respect to problems which are not only so complex, but also so new and so different from everything which we have had experienced before. I'm Thomas Filk. I'm a physicist from the University of Freiburg. I have a senior professorship in the field of theoretical physics, and my interests are mainly the didactics of physics and conceptual foundations of physics. And the conceptual foundations of physics already bring us to the subject I would like to talk about today. Namely, can we use certain fundamental concepts, for instance from physics, but also from other fields, to apply them to the complex problems which we sometimes face today in other fields. The idea is what we call TCRs. TCR stands for Thought Pattern of Cross-Disciplinary Relevance. This is about thought pattern, that is ideas or analogies from a certain field, which can be applied there and have been applied there successfully, to lift them to a level where they become quite abstract, where there might be simply a constellation of concepts, which now you can transfer to a different system, where there are similar constellations of concepts. Maybe the concepts have different names, but when you look at them and try to figure out what their meaning is, you will find that they are very closely related. And then you apply these ideas or analogies to this other field. Yeah, what I would like to explain in the slightly more detail is the thought pattern from physics. And one prominent thought pattern there is percolation theory. Or percolation theory is a huge subject in physics. It was developed in the context of oil exploration, some 40 years ago, 50 years ago. And the problem there was, you make a test drilling, you take rock samples, and you now want to judge from the rock sample whether there is a huge oil field or whether there are thousands of small oil fields not connected. In the first case, exploration is easy and you can make billions of dollars. In the second case, it's more difficult. So that means if you get that right, if you get it right to judge from the rock sample the size of an oil field, then that can make you a rich man. And this idea now can be transferred to other fields. Take, for instance, the spreading of an epidemic or the spreading of an infection. It's a very similar process. Something spreads through a kind of network of connectivities. Or you can take the spreading of a forest fire. Or you can take the spreading of ideas in a society. Or the spreading of concepts, the spreading of a product, the knowledge of people about a certain product. In that case, for instance, you would like to have the huge oil field. You would like as many people to know about it as can. While in other cases, the spreading of a disease, you would like to have the small patches that the disease doesn't spread much. So you can take this example from oil exploration with the general concept of percolation theory to other fields. So this is a typical example for a thought pattern which has been developed in one field and now is transferred to other fields. Another example I would like to mention is self-organized criticality. Self-organized criticality means that the system drives itself into a critical state. And one example is, for instance, earthquakes. Earthquakes, there's the tectonic plate movement, there's a tension which builds up, and then at a certain point, when the threshold is exceeded, there's an earthquake. So this idea of having tension on one hand, a friction which prevents relaxation, and a sudden eruption, an explosive eruption, that can be transferred to other fields also. Example are avalanches, which it's I think quite obvious that they are nearby, but stock market crashes are an example. Burnout syndromes in psychology are an example. There's a tension which builds up in people, in persons. There is a friction, strong friction. Usually it's a social pressure. You cannot simply cry out. And then at some point the threshold is exceeded and there's an eruption. So you can ask yourself, how can I deal with the burnout syndrome? And now you look at avalanches. What happens in avalanches? You trigger them. That's the usual way what you do. You trigger them when there's no danger. So the question with burnout syndromes is, can you apply the same technique to a burnout syndrome? Can you trigger the relaxation effect, the cry out, in a situation where it is not dangerous? This wouldn't work, for instance, in the case of stock market crashes. But there you have different strategies. So for instance, you can say, well, on a short term, you can increase the friction, which people do. They simply set out the market. On a long term, it would be much better to do the opposite, namely to relax the friction, that is, not to build up that much tension, because in that case, these eruptive moments are less likely to appear. These are examples of thought pattern from, in this case, the field of physics. And all these thought patterns give you ideas which you might be able to apply to a certain problem, and which helps you to view the problem from a new perspective. And in this way, it can help you to find a new solution.